Good evening and welcome to the Cancer Education Series brought to you by Mercy One and Above and Beyond Cancer. We're funded from a grant by the Iowa Cancer Consortium, for which we are very grateful. My name is Chris Goodale and I'm the Executive Director of Above and Beyond Cancer. It's my pleasure each week to be able to introduce the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer, Dr. Richard Deming, who will introduce our speaker for this evening. Dr. Deming?
Chris, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining us on our video podcast tonight. And it is my honor to introduce Jim Hayes. This is going to be a real treat for me and for all of you. Jim is from Iowa, from Cedar Falls, right, Jim?
That's correct.
And Jim has a Master's of Divinity degree from St. Mary's Seminary and University in Baltimore, and a doctoral degree in homiletics from the Aquinas Institute at St. Louis University. He studied philosophy at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome, Italy. And his life has been blessed with opportunities to teach, counsel, write, minister, preach, lead retreats. And right now he is serving as the executive director of the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. He'll tell you more about that. And he has been able in this role to advance the center's mission to bringing understanding, hope, and healing to people of all ages through counseling and education. So welcome, Jim. Jim's presentation tonight is called 5 One-Word Prayers in the Time of Trouble. So I'll turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start off. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you as we talk tonight. I thought I'd go ahead and start with this from our website. You can see that we're dmpcc.org, as in Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center, and there's our contact information. And my email directly would be jhayes, Jhayes, at dmpcc.org. Thank you for capturing our mission like that. That's great. That we walk with people through counseling and education on that road to hope and healing, and we do so that people might live a fulfilling life. And I can put some of that information back up there. But we have about 30 therapists who are here and other delivery of services that we do. So social workers and psychologists and licensed mental health counselors and marriage and family counselors, and all for the purpose of healing and hope. So I really appreciate the partnership with Above and Beyond Cancer, and Dr. Deming is just a great advocate for mental health and also a supporter of ours that I just really appreciate all that you do in the community. And for me on a personal level too, I know that cancer touches us all in one way or another. I'm channeling my mom tonight. We lost her to pancreatic cancer 4 years ago next month. So walked that journey with her and with many other people, particularly in my life in ministry. And know what a privilege it is to kind of go through that, as painful as it can be, also how important it is to have healthy relationships as we walk through that. So thank you for all that you do. And thanks to all those who are listening and anybody who might listen going forward for the courage that you have and what you do in facing your daily challenges and going above and beyond them. I just some ground rules to kind of lay out what I'm doing tonight. I'm not going to overwhelm you with a lot of slides or a presentation because I'm just not that expert in anything. What I'd rather do is kind of share our experiences about how we get through difficult times. As you just heard, the title is, 5 one-word prayers in times of trouble. Well, who hasn't been through some kind of time of trouble and who hasn't reached out in one way or another? So I want to bring that into a kind of a simple framework for all of us. That's not only about cancer and cancer survivors and those who love those who are suffering from cancer, but for all of us, whatever the challenge is that we might face. And I hope it's helpful regardless of what challenge that is in your life. What I'd like to do to interact a little bit, I'm going to ask you as I go through this to jump into the chat. If you're not aware of that, just some Zoom ground rules. And, we all live in an age of Zoom these days, and many of us have got accustomed to this, but I'd like to do a little test of how to do some engagement. So if you hover over your screen, and I think Chris and I discussed this, that the chat room is open. So if you could open up that chat and see if you can come up with one word for something that was good about today. Let's test the system. And I'm going to ask Chris if that is showing up.
Yep, it sure is.
Great, great. I'm not seeing it, so I only get the chat that I threw in there. So that's good to know. And I asked Chris if he could kind of monitor the chat, and he'll jump into the presentation if he sees something that he thinks might be great for Dr. Deming or for me to talk a little bit more about as I do my presentation. So I'll ask you to kind of dive in as we go along to keep us all engaged as I do this. What I plan to do is just share a little poem to start, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about, just for a short moment, about a definition of what exactly is prayer from my perspective. And then I'm going to go into each one of those 5 words, and we'll reflect on those and how they relate to our lived experience. And then hopefully we'll have some time to talk about, through the chat or through raising some questions, what that presentation means to you, or what resonated with you, or what further questions you might have for follow-up. So that's kind of the plan for the evening. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'm going to start off with a poem that I think is appropriate for Above and Beyond Cancer, How to Climb a Mountain. I hope that is that font looking big enough? Okay.
Looks great.
I'll go ahead and recite this, and maybe in your imagination as you're listening to it, because poems are really meant to be heard. And is there a word that sticks out for you, or a phrase that sticks out for you that you might want to take with you tonight? How to Climb a Mountain by Maya Stein. Make no mistake, this will be an exercise in staying vertical. Yes, there will be a view later, a wide swath of open sky, but in the meantime, tree and stone. If you're lucky, a hawk will coast overhead, scanning the forest floor. If you're lucky, a set of wildflowers will keep you cheerful. Mostly, though, a steady sweat, your heart fluttering indelicately, a solid ache perforating your calves. This is called work. What you will come to know eventually and simply as movement, as all the evidence you need to make your way. Forget where you were. That story is no longer true. Level your gaze on the trail you're on, and even the dark won't stop you. Level your gaze on the trail you're on, and even the dark won't stop you. If you've ever climbed a mountain, and I know a lot of you have in your organization, starting out in the dark in the wee hours in order to get to that summit, it's tough in those steps walking in darkness, and you want to get to that view, but it is that movement and that work. And really what this presentation is about tonight is how to level our gaze with something as simple as one word, being mindful or being centered on one word to help us continue on this path that we're on, even if it feels like it's a dark one. I'll be happy to send that along too for posting for you all to do that as we go along. I appreciate the gift of poetry. To start off, as I said, I'm going to do just a quick definition of what is prayer. Now, obviously, that is a broad word depending on one's religious perspective and whether it is a person of faith or what faith tradition, all of those things. So I'm just going to talk about some generic things and basically think of prayer as a conversation. And it doesn't have to be directed. I mean, whatever that conversation is toward in terms of some kind of higher power for you, we can think about that from our own perspective. But to have a conversation with another, what do we need? First of all, we need to be aware, right? That there's someone else there. We're not just talking to ourselves. It's not a soliloquy. It's not a monologue. There's something, someone, some relationship that we are directing our attention to that person. So an awareness of who they are. And then in a conversation as well, if it's going to be a genuine conversation, and civil discourse is something we're talking about all the time these days, and like how do we bridge gaps and talk to the other, that I share something of myself. So I'm aware of the other, but I'm giving something of myself as I am talking to them. I'm not just kind of bringing an agenda. I'm bringing myself to that conversation. And what's really interesting to me is to have a true conversation with someone. Conversation and conversion and convert all come from the same word. I'm a little bit of a Latin geek, and it means turning, literally turning. So we might be thinking in one way or turned one way, and to become aware of this other person or to share something of myself, I have to turn my attention away from other things in order to focus on this one person that is in front of me. And often that requires some kind of change of heart or attention or something like that. And then we try to communicate with the other. So it's taking my life and your life, and there's some kind of a bridge that is built between us in a moment of prayer that I go outside of myself, and that to which my prayer is directed is also bridging back to me. So there's a crossover and a communication that happens. And finally, though we may not be immediately aware of it, there's typically some kind of response to that relationship. We hear something back from the other when we are in a true conversation. That requires listening. Listening in the best sense of the word, of not like assuming what they're going to say to me, but literally paying close attention to that person that is in front of me so that I might hear that response. So being aware, sharing something of ourselves, turning toward the other so that we might have communication or a bridge in that relationship, and then listening for the response. Ultimately, what it's about, that conversation, is about a relationship. So you could take prayer and say, rather than prayer to like I as a creature and God as a creator, that it be a human relationship is a great analog for us of talking to another person is very much what prayer is like for my definition of what we're talking about tonight. I don't know, if there's any response to that or thought for that you'd like to throw. Everybody has a different perspective on this stuff, but that's the construct I'm going to start of as I talk about. It's about relationship and it's about a conversation. Okay. I'll give you an example of, in my experience in working with terminally ill people. There's one that's still so vivid for me today, even though it happened back in 1988. I was doing some training as a hospital chaplain at the University of Colorado Hospital in Denver, and there was a horrible accident where a gentleman was burned very badly. He's in the burn unit, and he was not going to make it. And so I'm there with his family, and he's in incredible pain. And I'm like a young pup trying to figure out how to navigate this. They're hoping that there might be some comfort that I'm going to bring in pastoral care, being a chaplain, being present to this family. But I'm as intimidated by the experience as anybody else in the room. Like, I've got nothing to say to tragedy. And the only thing that that I gave them at that moment in time, and this, you have to understand, this is from a perspective of one religious tradition. Everyone in the room was Christian. And so I, in talking to this guy and hanging with him who's in excruciating pain, and they're trying to control all of that, he was concerned about, his family was concerned about how to pray, or, how can God help us through this? And I said, just take the word Jesus and just say that over and over in your heart, just quietly when it's hurting, when you don't know what to say, when you're afraid, whatever the case is, just turn that over, that one word. Don't worry about anything else in what you need to navigate right now. And it brought so much comfort to them, because it was, quite a duration of going through this dying process for them as a family, but it's something that they held on to that brought them comfort. And my take on that is that it's very much a mindfulness exercise, that it's sort of taking you out of this distraction of all of this pain and everything else that's going on, and it's bringing it into a manageable frame where the only thing I have to think about is this one word. And then that focus in itself frees me from some of these other anxieties, including the anxiety of excruciating pain. It doesn't heal it, doesn't take it away, but it helps one to find some comfort in that moment in time. And I have found that in my own life, of that kind of conversation and relationship, of my own sort of disciplines in this stuff, of often just taking one word. Traditionalists would call it sort of centering prayer, or a mindfulness exercise. This goes across religious traditions, very much in a Zen or Buddhist tradition as well, where you just take this one word, center yourself on that, focus on that one word, and it brings you into that awareness of the present moment. So it's such a simple thing. You'd think we'd figure this stuff out over centuries, and many people have. I don't often get there, but in those moments when I actually do kind of stay focused on it, it really, really does work. So with that in mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about the 5 one-word prayers in times of trouble. Now, I have to give credit here to an author that I really admire, Anne Lamott. If you've heard of her, then you know she's a gifted writer. She has profound insight. She's pretty cheeky and irreverent, so you have to be prepared for some colorful language when you're reading her books. And she's written a number of them. Traveling Mercies is one that I really enjoyed. But this particular book I'm citing tonight, she calls it, for her prayers, help, thanks, wow. So she has 3 words. And you find out as you read the book, she actually kind of sneaks in a 4th word. She says grace eventually. So help, thanks, wow. Now, though I admire her a lot, and I would highly recommend the book, from my perspective, there's something missing from that. So I had to add a couple of words to the list when I go through this and kind of use it in my own life. So I do help, thanks, sorry, wow, and yes. And I'm going to talk about each one of these. And as I do each one of them, I'm going to ask, Dick, if you'd like to enter into some conversation about this, or we can put some things into the chat as well. I'll kind of go through each one of them. Now, you may like all 5 or 6 of these words if you include her word of grace, or you may leave tonight with, this is the one I really want to focus on. And I'm just going to kind of center on this one word and plug it into what I understand prayer to be, maybe for the next day or the next week, that when I find myself distracted or anxious or anything, I'm just going to kind of go to this one word. And I'll kind of walk us through an exercise on that as we continue tonight. All right, I'm going to stop and take a little breath before I go into each one of these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to recognize that prayer is an experience of the body as well. If you can, where you are and you're able, just some kind of movement. If you want to stand up and turn around, I'll show you. This is a really complicated exercise. Loosen your shoulders. I know you guys learn a lot of stuff about the body and the work that you do with Mercy and Above and Beyond Cancer too. Doesn't it help a little bit, instead of listening to me talk, just take a little body break like that for a second? I think that's really important. So let's start with help. This is the most natural one-word prayer that I think any one of us could probably tell a story. And when you think about those difficult times in your life and you want to enter into a conversation, particularly if you have some kind of a faith tradition where you think of some kind of creator God, or a powerful God, or a loving God, and that you feel like you're in relationship with that God, that help comes naturally. Anybody who's been on an oncology ward knows that that's one that comes out pretty regularly. Or if you've been in an emergency room, or something that happens at work or home that's just kind of overwhelming to you and you feel a little bit overwhelmed, you reach out and say, help. I don't think that one needs a lot of description, but if you think about that definition that I had, help, first of all, there's an awareness of the other, right? So my request for help is directed somewhere. There's a sense of sharing of myself. That is such a vulnerable moment and so rare for us as human beings, particularly as we like to think of ourselves as having it all together and being independent. To ask for help of another is a vulnerable exercise. And so you're so genuine when you get yourself reduced to a level where you have a sincere request for help, that you're sharing something of yourself, like, I can't do this on my own. I need help. There's a turning, if you will, to the other, that conversion, conversation, convert kind of thing. That sense of the illusion that we have of being independent or even able physically, because we're all temporarily abled in one way or another until we're not. Get in a bike accident and all of a sudden you can't do things that you did before is an example of that. And there's something about that that is so human that makes us that vulnerable that we actually request something of the other because we can't do it on our own. It helps us to enter into a relationship when we do that. And then that sense of communication, when we cry out in help, there's that bridge, if you will, of the other coming to you and you going to them and your vulnerability. And it's like, I need you to help me. People in healthcare understand this. We see one picture after another in this pandemic of particularly nursing care that's going on, where that is the only person that this person who's suffering from the pandemic or from COVID has, is this one nurse who's in an ICU with them as they're struggling to breathe, and they're doing a Zoom or a phone call with their family, somehow bridging that vulnerability of crying for help. And the hard part on this one is the response. For me as a theologian and somebody in ministry, it's like God didn't answer my prayer, right? Because we have a preconceived notion of what we are supposed, who we are supposed to be, or what we're supposed to look like, or what healing looks like. And so that sense of surrender doesn't come to us very naturally if we don't get what we want. And we'll get to that when we talk about yes as one of the one-word prayers later. But what is the response that we have when we make that cry for help? And it may not come to us immediately, but it's a worthy question to say, what am I hearing back as I make this cry? What am I learning about myself or about the other as I go through this? So what I'd ask you to do is, if you're willing, to think about something that you would ask help for in the chat, just for a minute. I mean, at this stage in your life, what's something, and I know that's pushing it in terms of we don't know each other and the trust level, and I don't expect anybody to do anything that doesn't feel comfortable to them, but an example of like, where do you need help right now? Even expressing it out loud in a community like this, and we maybe capture a little bit of in the chat, that you have the hearts of these other people that are with you tonight. Just saying it out loud and knowing that we each need something is in itself a healing exercise to put that out there. So what's something that you would say you need help? And Chris, I'll come back to this as we go along and let you kind of review those, and we'll see, we can kind of hit one of those each as we do each word. We can review that and say what's something that struck you, as you get to be kind of the Oz man behind the curtain on some of this. But just knowing that's kind of going out into this community right now, and that you're not alone, and that it's a very human experience to be dependent upon the other, particularly in times of trouble. So what a wonderful prayer, sometime when you're most in need, to just sit quietly, take deep breaths, and say help. And maybe even in your breathing, to breathe in help, and then breathe out the anxiety or the pain or whatever it is that's going on in your life out. And just repeat it with your breathing over and over, and let go of all the other stuff that's going on there, and trust that there is some kind of conversation, a meaningful conversation or relationship that you're going to have the response that you need in that cry that is such a sincere cry for help. That one's pretty easy because I think most of us have had that experience. The next one is thanks. And gratitude is another great mindfulness exercise, and one that most of us don't take enough time for. I don't want to throw a lot of guilt out there, but it's probably true. I started the presentation off with just something, what was something that was good about today? I find if you take 2 minutes a day for some kind of a gratitude reflection, whether you write it down in a journal or you just pause and take a moment and say thanks, and reflect on thanks, on something will come to you if you use that kind of intentionality for it. And what's wonderful about gratitude and saying thanks is that it causes us to enter more deeply into our day when something might not be obvious to us about what's good about today. Just through that intentionality and through that exercise and paying some attention to it, something will pop. And then we have a sense, well, today wasn't that bad. I mean, this happened. An example for me might be that, who would have wished this pandemic on us? And for us at the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center, all of our people were trained in talk therapy. And so folks come to us and we're an outpatient service and they sit down and they talk about what's going on in their lives. And our folks are trained to pay attention to body language and facial expression. So the body, in addition to the words that they're hearing from a person. And so our folks are like, there's no way I could ever do telehealth. That's not the way that I was trained. It doesn't work. And all of a sudden, when there's no other option, everybody went to telehealth and telemedicine. And we are now, people who we have people who come to us from 2 or 3 hours away because we provide our services regardless of people's ability to pay. And so sometimes they can't find quality mental health services in maybe a rural area, and they drive to us. And so now all of a sudden, instead of 2 hours here, a 1 hour session, and 2 hours back home, 5 hours, they hop on a computer from their home in rural Iowa and they do that session with one of our quality therapists here. So you might think, well, what is there to be grateful for about a pandemic? And you step back from something like that and say, well, this is in some ways changed us for the better in terms of us being able to deliver these services to other people. Now, again, I wouldn't want to go through a pandemic in order to get there, but that's just an exercise in intentionality, right? You just stop and say, well, there must be something to be grateful for. With our staff, when we came to the end of 2020, I told them I was getting so tired of people saying, screw you, 2020, I want 2021. And my problem with that is you mean I'm just flushing 2020? I lost a whole year of my life and there was nothing to be grateful for about that. I didn't learn anything in this moment in time. There's always something. And I know that's a little Pollyannish, but through intentionality, and we spend some time reflecting on it, usually some kind of response will come to that kind of prayer. So you may not feel like, and it's perhaps in those moments in time when you least feel like you're grateful for something, say like you just got diagnosed with cancer. It's like, well, that crap, what is there to be grateful for about that? And I'm not saying that's an easy exercise, but it might be something to be grateful for the quality of care that's even available in the developing world. I don't know what the answer to that would be, but usually if we spend enough time and enough intentionality on it, there will be some kind of response of something. It might be really simple, something to be grateful for each day. And that exercise in itself is life-giving. So I had you kind of enter your gratitude thing when we started about something was good about today. So that one should already be in the chat. If you'd like to throw something else in there about in listening right now that maybe something else just came to your mind, I'll just take a minute and take a breath and reflect for ourselves. And if you want to throw something else in the chat, go ahead and do that. But just take a moment, say thanks, breathe in thanks. And what else comes to your mind? Just for a little bit of humor and being self-serving, I'm going to say that I'm grateful for my wife just in case she watches this. How's that? And I really am grateful for my wife, but I'm going to do that just in case she picks this up. She might be watching, or she'll certainly look at it on YouTube if she hears what I just said. So the next word is sorry, and this is not one that Anne Lamott has in her book. And the reason that I do that one is partly my training and my own life experience and my worldview, but it's also, there are so many relationships that get fractured in our lives. So much brokenness that can occur, sometimes through our own selfishness, sometimes through things that we had nothing to do with, but broken relationships are a part of our reality. And you know, I'm very concerned about us as a nation and our inability to talk to one another in lots of ways in this moment in history. It's always going to be that way because of human nature, but not valuing the opportunity to reconcile, to heal, to make right again in broken relationships is to diminish our opportunity to flourish as human beings. Because we all make mistakes, relationships break down, and we have to find ways to heal when they break. And this is one thing for me in terminal illness that I find to be an opportunity for a gift if people take advantage of it. I read an article, I don't even remember the author's name. This is years ago, probably 20 years ago. It was in the Atlantic Monthly and it was called Magic Time. And this person was talking about the opportunity presented by the diagnosis of a terminal illness. And, you know, we all know in our heads somewhere that we're mortal. Nobody gets out alive. When you have kind of a shorter runway where you're aware in a kind of a 3 to 6 months or 2 years time frame that somebody gives you as a prognosis, that's frightening, and there's no question about it, and nobody wants to hear that. But it also provides an opportunity to say the value of this day rises exponentially because we enter into the day or try. And that's what I love about Above and Beyond Cancer. It's like you can flourish in the midst of this magic time. It might be a diminished kind of flourishing what you originally thought it was. But if you think about that moment in time as well, of all the mistakes that we make in our life, and for me, walking with people who were terminally ill, and particularly if they're actively dying and maybe in a hospice or a hospital or some kind of a care center or maybe in their home. I've seen so many touching stories of reconciliation where people recognize, you know what, I'm tempted to swear here, but I won't. All this crap that we were carrying around in anger with one another, I need to let it go. I love you. I'm sorry that I held on to this resentment because that's all that's left, right? Are those relationships and those loving relationships, and they're not perfect relationships. They have had need to reconcile. And so to have an opportunity to say sorry, and sometimes it's saying sorry for the fact that I didn't ask for help, or sorry because that I wasn't grateful enough, that I wasn't the person that I was called to be because of X, Y, or Z, whatever the human limitation was, that the imperfection that I brought to this life. And to be reconciled with, it's okay. It's okay. It's not important once you realize this is all the time that we have. So looking at reconciliation and saying you're sorry as an opportunity, particularly in times of trouble, it's just not worth it to hang on to the resentment and to find ways to heal. This one, I don't want to necessarily throw into the chat, because a lot of times people hesitate. We don't want to admit our warts too much, but if you were going to think about sorry, if there's something that you want to put up as far as an insight that you have about that, by all means do that. But what I'd ask you to do is just kind of go through this experience and maybe think of a moment in time when you were wrong, you hurt someone else, you made a mistake, whether intentional or unintentional, but the ripple effects of that moment kind of spread out through other people's lives. Just take a moment and think of maybe a person that you hurt and see their face and say, sorry. 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 I think it's a worthy word. I wish you would have put it in her book. The next one I love. Wow. A sense of awe and wonder. And how is it that we lose something that comes so naturally to little kids? I've got two daughters who are older now, but bugs create awe in our household. They create fear too, but they're awed by like the structure of a spider and looking at look at that. Getting ourselves or our children in particular out in nature to stop and pay some attention for just a moment naturally leads to awe. In the mission of Above and Beyond Cancer and some of the things that you do for, physically for people, but the reason I chose that poem about a mountaintop, awe is often called a mountaintop experience. And I love, I'm not a climber, I'm a hiker, but I've been to lots of mountaintops as a hiker. So I'm not a technical guy with climbing. But being on a mountaintop, and in particular, getting up there in that darkness that the poem talks about and having the sun rise when you're on that peak, it always leaves you breathless. It helps us to realize how small we are as this a part of this universe too, and being awestruck by that. I do these 5 prayers as a practice for myself. I'm a runner, and so when I'm out for a run, I run through these, and I run early in the morning. So sometimes I'm getting back from my run right about when the sun is coming up, and wow, or awe as a one-word prayer comes pretty naturally at that moment in time. The rest of the stuff, as I'm reflecting while I'm running about things I need help, that's pretty easy too. But that one, it's almost always nature for me. But it can be, a relationship like, wow, how did I ever get so lucky that this, person fell in love with me? Or, wow, if anybody's been through some kind of like major healing from a bad health event, and like the awe of and the wow of the healing power of the human body, it just makes you stop. And I think that this one goes back to medical staff too, just because of the nature of this is Mercy and Above and Beyond Cancer. But I go back to all the medical workers that have been with us through this pandemic. And to date, I've not suffered from COVID, but I've had colleagues who have. And so my experience is people that I know and love who have had it, but also that vicarious experience of some of these pictures that you see of hospital workers looking drained because they had everything they had, being present to because they're the only one that could be there. And what is it that gives someone that kind of strength to be that present to someone else who's crying out help? wow. So this one, I would be interested in a chat. If you could do just a second and think, what has been a moment of wow for you, with not divulging too much of yourself, but just like, what's a moment that caused wow as a response from you? So take a second with that one, and we'll throw that and share those with each other, because I think those are great to share. Okay, I'm going to head into our last one here. This one also is not in Lamott's book. She's Help, Thanks, Wow is the title of her book. So I had this one, yes. This is and it's mostly a personal story for me of people of a certain age would know Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the General Secretary of the United Nations, and his journal was found after he died in a plane accident. And it was eventually published under the title Markings. And a quote that I live by that was influential for me in that book was this: for all that has been, thanks, right? There's the first word we started with. For all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. There's a sense of abandonment in that, but it's not a passive kind of a thing. It's actually an active. That when I think about my day, and I have good days and bad days like everybody else, but when I'm facing my day or going over my daily schedule or looking at my task list and all of the things that are coming my way, and some of I'm not very excited about, I go there and say, this day has as much opportunity for me to flourish as yesterday or tomorrow or the best day of my life. If I but find a way to say yes to the opportunity that's there, even though it doesn't feel like an opportunity for me and it doesn't feel like I'm grateful for it, and I'm certainly not feeling like saying thanks, I got to go to this budget meeting. It's a spirit of curiosity about how could this day help me to flourish? How can I say yes to this day, even though it doesn't seem like it's going to be a great day? How can I say yes to this day with an understanding that this relationship that I have as a person of prayer with this person on the other side of the bridge who's meeting me, if you will, is offering an opportunity? If I would just kind of surrender and not go into the day or into the moment with my own agenda, but to say there's got to be something here that we can find together that's going to help us to flourish. And again, that too sounds Pollyannish a little bit, like head in the sand kind of stuff. That's not realistic. But when I do that, and I'm curious about how is this helping me to become a better person, I often get a response in some way, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, or I really did learn something there, even though I hesitated to enter into it, to have the courage to say yes. Now, this one in particular for being sick, and if it's a terminal diagnosis, that's probably not the first word that comes out of our mouth. Right? Yes. I accept this. Wow, what a great opportunity. But if we plug it in with the rest of these words that we've talked about, our humanity is not diminished. Our body might be diminished by illness, but our humanity is not diminished in the sense that we can still say yes. What is stopping us from saying yes to this thing? That we can actually go above and beyond what looks like something that's insurmountable by saying, yes, I'm going to find a way to be alive in the midst of this circumstance. Yes. That's hard work. I'm not claiming any of these words are easy. And, you know, there was that sense that I talked about of like, this conversation, this prayer is from the same word as conversion, turning from what seems natural, like how could I possibly, with a diagnosis like that, find a way to be more fully alive, even as my body is dying. And I turn to become aware of the other, to share my illness myself with the other, to put myself out there in some kind of vulnerability and crying for help. And somehow I'm entering into an even deeper relationship with the people that I love, or the God that I have followed, or whatever the case might be. Yes, I believe it's possible. I believe it's possible. That one I think is such a personal thing. I don't know about chat for that, but what I would say is just to go with the quote for a second, and think back over our day today. For all that has been, thanks. Just today, take a moment. Just today, what happened today? Good and bad. For all that has been, thanks. And now we think about tomorrow. For all that will be, yes. Kind of know what my day is tomorrow because of my calendar, but in my day, there's usually 2 or 3 surprises that are unanticipated. And so to say yes right now to tomorrow sort of makes it an adventure. And it's a little bit frightening to say that I'm going to say yes because I know that some things might not be stuff that I would want to do or encounter. It might even be a crisis of some kind. Yes, I think there will be an opportunity to be alive in the midst of that circumstance. I'm going to stop there. I mean, she has a final word called grace in parentheses, eventually. And what I'd like to do is, you know, Dick, I don't know if there's anything in reaction to this stuff for us to have a little conversation. And what I'd ask the people in the chat to do, if you have a question or a comment or something you'd like to throw that Chris can kind of take a look at, that he can throw into this conversation as well, or as another option for the chat, out of these 5 words, right? So help, thanks, sorry, wow, yes. We can do a little poll, and which one is resonating with you today? If you were going to do a 1-word prayer of what's going on in your life, which one of those words do you most need to speak? And we can do a little